I'm John Kane, and I welcome you to Let's Talk Native on this Tuesday, April 14th, 2020. While this program may not provide a path to spiritual enlightenment, we do encourage and in some cases start conversations. We kind of break the rules here for Native radio. We don't do prayers or buffalo speeches or any mystic teachings about Native stuff. We take a tough look at history, oppression, and survival. We talk about culture, the arts, politics, and identity. And we may step on a few toes along the way. But our real goal here is to bring people together by breaking down what separates us. We will take on the false narratives and provide critical thinking to all that's heaped upon us. And we do it all right here, live from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. So let's talk Native. But first, let me remind people that our audio streams on our website, which is www.letstalknative.com. We stream live video of the show on our Let's Talk Native Facebook group page via Facebook Live, and that's shared across a bunch of other Facebook group pages as well. We take the audio and we post it up onto SoundCloud, which puts it out as a podcast across all your favorite podcast platforms. We take the video and we put it up on our YouTube channel, which is Let's Talk Native TV. I encourage you to subscribe to our podcast or subscribe to our YouTube channel. And of course, I do encourage you to go to our website. There we've got links to the video. We've got links to the podcasts. There's a player there that you can, like I said, if you can listen to our live broadcast on our website. And when we're not live, we've got a loop of previous shows that you can listen to. So there's always something you can catch there. And of course, like I said, links to the podcast. We also have our store. So let me again, I may not be the best model, but this is one of our shirts. It's a Washington Whiteskins shirt with the lead Washington quarterback in the center of the shirt. This is an example of some of the stuff that we've produced ourselves, and we put it up on our store page. So if you'd like to check out some Let's Talk Native merch, this is among one of the shirts. We've got a bunch that Jake designed that use some pretty controversial images that are conversation starters. Or enders, depending on who looks at your shirt, I guess. We kind of key off of L. Frank Baum's racist comments, the author of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. We post a couple of pictures of folks like George Washington and Abraham Lincoln that tell a different version of that history. But anyway, so these are some of the things that we have on our page. So if you go to our website, not only can you catch some Let's Talk Native content, but you can also look at some of the stuff. And if you order our shirts, it helps fund a little bit of what we do here. So there you go. All right. I am the show's host and producer. I am joined here in studio by Jake Proud, who manages our audio and our video. And let me get right into it. Look, I titled this show "Fattening the Curve." Now I know you're used to hearing "flattening the curve," but the point is, and I know Jake's going to pull up an image behind me at some point here. All of this talk about flattening the curve, I think people need to understand what that means. And it's not like they've hidden this, but when they talk about flattening the curve, what they're trying to avoid is a spike. On the image behind us, you see the red curve is the curve they're trying to avoid. And as far as graphs go, what the vertical line of the graph is the number of cases, and the horizontal line is the number of days. So the concern is if you had a whole bunch of cases in a short period of time, you would have a spike of cases all at once, and you would exceed the ability of hospitals to treat patients. So if you can flatten the curve, if you can keep that curve from going as high, then you can keep it closer to a range that hospitals can manage, which is essentially what's been effectively done. But here's the downside to it. The downside is you're lengthening. Notice that the curve that is flattened is fattened, and that's where I get fattened the curve. So if you notice the blue curve extends for a much longer period of time. So to the extent there's been success in flattening the curve, and when the jury's out a little bit on that, I know all the governmental officials are saying that everybody's doing a wonderful job. But if you flatten the curve, then you fatten the curve. So the lower you bring that peak number of cases per day, the longer this spread is going to continue. Now, I know they don't say that because it doesn't sound real comfortable. See, the whole idea here is, if you look at the area in red versus the area in blue, the areas are about the same. So what they're saying is, by flattening the curve, you're not really limiting the number of people who will be infected. You're just dragging out over a longer period of time, and you're doing it in such a way that you don't have that, again, that hospitals aren't inundated. This isn't even a curve about deaths or death rates or whatever else. The concern is that if you exceeded the hospital's capabilities for treating patients, then you would have a higher death rate because you would have more people who aren't treated. So again, I don't know if everybody's being totally truthful about flattening the curve, because the numbers, everything in this, even on these graphs, is based on only cases that have been tested. And as I've said repeatedly on this show, the problem is not very many people have been tested. The United States still has not reached 1% of its population being tested. Still hasn't reached 1%. And in places like New York and New Jersey, where they've tested a lot more people, on a per capita basis, well, total and per capita, they've tested over 2% in New York, 2.4%, and almost 2.5% in New Jersey. But in those two places, you've got what is it? It's the testing positive rate, the rate of testing or positive tests. It's 40% in New York and 52% in New Jersey. So, again, half of the people who are tested are positive. So again, but these are just the tests. It doesn't really. It's not clear about what the general population is. So, like today, for instance, again, some milestones crossed. I mean, in the let's see, what's the total in the United States is over 600,000, 613,000 people. So they crossed over the 600,000 mark. They also, the death total is at 26,000. Now, another milestone is on the world level. Right now, it's just about 2 million people. Perhaps a rounding error short of it. I mean, it's 1,998,000 or something like that, 1,000 people. It's literally just a couple of thousand people off of being 2 million people, and it's 126,000 people that have died. But again, these are only numbers that fit within the range of people who have been tested. And here's the thing that I've noticed is I've been looking at the numbers on this thing. The United States had gotten to a place only last week where they were testing almost 150,000 people a day. But right now, they're only testing about 110,000. So why is that? Why is the rate of testing going down? Well, look, we could be conspiracy theorists, and perhaps that's what I'm going to be here. I'm suggesting that the curve isn't flattening as much as the rate of testing is flattening. See, every day they were getting more and more testing going on. More and more testing was happening. And of course, we never know, and we will never know, whether the testing was ever keeping pace with the spread. There's really essentially no way of knowing that. But they were testing more and more people every day until the last few days. And it's no coincidence, but the federal government said that they were going to pull back on federal testing facilities. So only state and counties are doing them. It's not FEMA, not CDC, not anymore. They've handed all that off to hospitals, to the state facilities and county facilities. So from yesterday to today, only about 120,000 more people were tested, and it had gone up above, I think as high as 160,000 people a day were tested. Now, keep in mind, there's 331 million people in the United States. If you're only testing about 100,000 people a day, that means it's going to take about 3,000 days to test everybody. And here's the problem with that. Once you've tested everybody, you got to test everybody again, because anybody who passed the test, anybody who was tested negative, is still susceptible to the disease. So I've rapidly gotten to a place where I'm wondering, is testing even relevant? I posted a comment on Facebook today where I said, treat the sick, test the dead, and then test the living for antibodies, because that's the only test result that matters. If you've had the disease and survived it, so your body has developed antibodies, you're the only one who's safe around the disease after that. Arguably, they don't really know for sure. But if you tested negative today, it doesn't mean you can't catch the disease tomorrow. And since you're never going to test enough people, I mean, again, less than 1% of the U.S. population has been tested. I mean, that's a pretty small number to make judgments about apexes and about flattening the curve. And, and even some of that. I mean, one of the things that Cuomo keeps saying is that the hospital admissions have dropped. Well, here's the problem that I have with that. Sure, they've dropped. But have they dropped because people are getting less sick? Or because for the drumbeat for the last 6 weeks is how the hospitals are overrun and how chaotic it is, how you don't have enough staff, you don't have enough beds, you don't have enough ventilators, you don't have, just basic materials. So how many people who would have gone to the hospital aren't? Well, that leads me to, and this is coming out of New York City. So again, today New York didn't break records for the number of new cases, but it was still almost 27,000 new cases today. But they did set a record for the number of deaths in one day. 2,407 people died today. That's higher than any previous day. Now they're saying, well, it's because the lag between hospital admissions and deaths. Well, here's the other tidbit of information. New York City reported. Now this is the city reporting this now. That 3,778 additional deaths that have occurred since March 11th, that's just a little over a month ago, have been classified as probable, and has defined probable as descendant had no known positive laboratory test for COVID-19, but the death certificate lists as cause of death COVID-19 or an equivalent. Now, the site that I use, which is Worldometer, and I'm going to check and see what Johns Hopkins, what their dashboard is saying about this, but they said they still aren't characterizing this 3,700 people as COVID deaths. They're trying to figure out how they can. But it's worth noting that this isn't the first report that's coming out of New York City. A couple of days ago, New York City reported that they've had a 400% increase in cardiac arrests over the same time last month. So, and again, if you're not testing everybody, the only deaths that you're attributing, officially to COVID-19 are those who were tested when they're alive, because nobody's testing dead people. And I think that, frankly, finding cause of death is more important, because look, if somebody comes into the hospital and they can't breathe, does it matter whether they have COVID or not? I mean, you've got to treat them as if they do anyway. You still got to get oxygen to them one way or the other. Now, and in terms of spread and that kind of stuff, look, it like I said, when in New York City, 40% of the people who are tested are testing positive, which means 60 of them aren't, but they're still sick enough to be in the hospital. So I don't even know, how they're separating those people. Nobody in New York City, or in New Jersey for that matter, they only get tested if they show up at a hospital sick enough to be admitted. And I know that's the way it is in a lot of places. So, look, the scary thing is, because there are politicians that are making judgments about how flat the curve has gotten, even though that flattening of the curve may have more to do with the limit of testing, those guys are also starting to talk about opening up the economy again, putting people back to work. So Are the graphs driving the decision to open up the economy, or is the decision to open the economy driving the graphs? I mean, I know that sounds cynical, but again, for all those people who think that I'm buying everything the man is selling, no, I'm not. I just have a different view about this thing. I don't think this thing is a hoax. I don't think this thing is being overhyped. I think it's being downplayed. I think this thing is worse than than most people know. And like I said, flattening the curve is fattening the curve. So that means we're going to be in this thing for twice as long than we would have been if all the self-distancing and stuff didn't happen. Now, I'm not saying that shouldn't have happened, but I will tell you one thing. I know that there are guys like Stephen Miller and Jared Kushner advising the President of the United States who would have just soon let this thing spike early and get over as soon as possible. And you know why? I'll tell you why. Two reasons. Not only would the economy be shut down for a lot lower time, many fewer days, but think about it. These are the kind of people who say, look, if old people die, they're not productive in the economy anyway. They're a burden to the healthcare system. And homeless people, they're not contributing. For people like this, it's always a dollars and cents calculation. Now, don't mistake what I'm saying is something that I believe or that I'm in favor of. But I guarantee, for all of those people who are touting this as a population adjustment, and that man has a hand in it, well, man could have had a hand in it. And the more I hear about guys like Trump, suggesting that it's time to, restart the economy on May 1st. Well, one thing I will say, although flattening the curve didn't really stop the spread, and it may never have been the intent to do that, I don't know, because here's the way it could have happened. If there was a very, very aggressive lockdown for 30 days, then the virus could have been stopped. But as long as you have even just a few people still running around infecting people, because that's how it started, right? It only started with a few people, and then it spreads. But if the virus truly dies, after because it can't be spread for a couple of weeks, then that would have been a way to end it. But that was never going to be done in this country. Because in this country, people have this false sense of what freedom really means. And it isn't freedom, people don't mind their freedom coming at the cost of others. And that's what you have here. So this is, look, I know that I don't do my show and tell you all kinds of happy news, because there's no way to interpret this thing. Look, as you got folks like, Cuomo or Trump or anybody else trying to spin this in the most positive light, people are freaking dying. Lots of people are dying. And I know, look, I still see people posting, well, there hasn't been as many cases of COVID-19 as there was the flu or this and that. Well, this thing has only been in existence for a couple of months, that measurably. The pandemic was only declared a month ago. I mean, as a global pandemic, there was health warnings before that. Clearly, more could have been done in February. But as far as any action taken in the United States, there's been no meaningful action in terms of behavior of Americans, except for 3 or 4 weeks ago. I mean, Trump was asked, why didn't you do something in February? And he says, well, I stopped, Chinese nationals from coming in on January 31st. Well, ironically, it seems like Europeans are the ones who infected this continent. That's never happened before. So, I mean, and then Trump spent, the big part of February still calling it a hoax, and that the Democrats are trying to use this against him. And here's the part that's really pathetic. If Donald Trump can still mount an effective campaign against the weak candidate the Democrats have put up, having, waged war against the media, having been impeached, having, a dozen of his staff and including some cabinet members, convicted People who worked on his campaign and his administration convicted of felonies. Like I said, being impeached, and now mismanaging a global pandemic to the point where the United States leads in every category it doesn't want to lead in. Number of cases, number of deaths. And of course, it's still way down the line in terms of its rate of testing. And I'm not talking about how many tests per day. I'm saying percentage of your population. There are 41, I think, actually take it back. I think there's 42 other countries that have tested a higher percentage of their population than the United States. So when Trump stands up and says that he's created he's made the United States the envy of the world, well, let's go back to calling it a laughing stock, because that's what it is. I mean, it's really, really important that people understand how badly this is being managed. And I'm not saying any of this stuff because I'm trying to campaign for Joe Biden. My feeling is, after 3.5 years of Donald Trump, if the best the Democrats could throw as a contender against Donald Trump was Joe Biden, well, you may deserve 4 more years of Trump. But here's the bad part. The worst part is that some of Trump's incompetence is costing lives. And, maybe that's okay if it's not anybody that you care about. But at some point, you are going to, somebody is going to be adversely affected by this. And I don't mean just get sick for a few days. Somebody is going to die because this thing was managed poorly. And I don't know how, I mean, you would think, because the elderly population, which is, by and large a big part of Trump's base, you would think that would affect things. But I don't know. I know his poll numbers are dropping down, but not the way you would think they should. And and the wealthy elite, they're still measuring his success based on the stock market. And even though it tanked, they're going to say that wasn't his fault. And every day they have a positive day where it moves up a couple hundred points, they all start slapping him on the back. He put together this new task force or committee, and it's family members of his son-in-law, his daughter, and a few other titans of the rich that are supposed to advise him about opening up the country again. I don't know. It's like I said, if we could talk about a health risk, a global pandemic, and talk about it without it being political, that'd be great. But that's impossible. It's impossible to not understand the political implications. I mean, this pandemic, by all you would think, would cost Trump his presidency. And the part that's kind of, shitty about it all is the Democrats are hoping this does cost him the presidency, which means that there's an indirect, loss of life calculation against, against beating Trump. There's a calculation there on the side of the Democrats. So, I mean, this is the part that gets really, really creepy. All right, hey, we're going to take a break here in just a minute, and then when we come back, I want to talk a little bit about some of what's happening with not just the Seneca Nation here, Cattaraugus and Allegheny, but even the folks out in Tonawanda. We do have a couple of confirmed cases in Seneca Nation territory, Cattaraugus and Allegheny, and apparently a couple, or at least a confirmed case in Tonawanda, and I think that's causing people to take actions that may not be as rational as what people would anticipate. I mean, we knew it was out there, folks, and the idea that it's now made its way in the door, that this isn't the time to overreact. Whatever action should have taken place before, could have taken place before. But we'll talk about it when we come back. And this has to do with, what do you do to limit, people coming onto your territory? And are all territories the same? Can they all adopt the same kind of practice? Talked a little bit about it before, but we'll talk about it more when we come back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native, and we'll be right back in a few. All right, thanks for coming back. This is John Kane, and this is Let's Talk Native. I want to thank our sponsors. I want to thank Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses. I want to thank the good folks at Grand River Enterprises and NWS. And look, and anybody else who has supported the show in the past and continues to show support from time to time. You guys are the ones who enable us to do this even now. When when so many people are can't do their normal day-to-day activities, we've been doing this. We do 3 shows a week. We do 2 Let's Talk Native shows, and we're doing our New York show out of this studio here. And we couldn't do it without your support. So we want to thank you guys. I also want to thank all of you who share the shows, whether it's the New York show that I do for WBAI in New York City, or whether it's the shows we do here for Let's Talk Native that are predominantly internet and podcasts, but also they show up on a couple of other radio stations and internet stations as well. But all of you who share the videos and the audio, the podcasts, the Facebook live streams, all that stuff, you guys help me get the word out. And look, if you don't agree with what I'm talking about here, that's fine too. I'm trying to start conversations, and I'm certainly willing to be challenged on some of this stuff. And if you don't agree with my assessment on fattening the curve versus flattening the curve, I get it. This is the conversation that I want people to have. I want people to understand. I also want people to think critically about the information that you're being fed. I know most of the Native people who are out there calling this a hoax are looking at it the complete opposite way. That I think that there's a lot of propaganda being spooned out with this thing, but not in the same way. I don't think that this is being built up so they can install chips and declare martial law and all that other stuff. I think some of that stuff could come out of this thing, but I think that this thing is being downplayed because guys like Donald Trump are the only thing he could brag about was the economy, and most of that economy that was positive was only positive for the very extremely wealthy. So the income inequality was huge, and so his employment numbers and his stock market numbers and all of that stuff he could brag about has gone away with this thing. So he wants this thing to go away too, and that's my concern about how the flattening of the curve is being described, how the plateaus or the apexes are being described. At the end of the day, I still think there's a huge problem because most of the data is only based on the rate of testing. Rates of infection, death rates, all of the other numbers that are being derived out of all of these charts and graphs and dashboards and websites are still relying almost completely on test confirmed or confirmed by test cases. So when a statement gets issued from New York City saying, look, we got a bunch of people who are dying at home. We think that there may be between 180 and 195 people a day dying at home. Then that may be COVID, but they haven't been tested. That kind of throws a wrinkle in the hole. And that's only just New York City. New York City's been the most bold about saying things like the 400% increase in cardiac arrest. And cardiac arrest is one of the things that happens because of this disease. Pneumonia and cardiac arrest, or cardiac arrest because of pneumonia, is the most common way that this disease takes lives. And so now this last bit that they put out there saying that there was over 3,700 people that have died since March 11th, that they're saying the cause of death was either COVID or, something similar, or its equivalent. They're not even showing up on all this other data. But even without that number, like I said, today was the highest number yet for the number of deaths in the United States, 2,400 people in a single day. So, and again, I think that number's not accurate. It could be twice that, because all the people who die who haven't been tested, they're not being counted the same way. And I saw a bunch of people say, well, the CDC is telling people to put down cause of death COVID-19. Well, in New York City, what they're saying is that it's probable. that they did die of COVID-19 or its equivalent. That's not the same thing as saying that it has been definitively defined. And the fact is, they aren't going to test dead people. So I'm saying all this stuff because I think people have to be aware and do take this stuff seriously. And look, and if you're out there, out and about, and you want to go someplace to raise hell, don't. Stay the freak home. You know, the best thing you can do for yourself is try to stay away from other people for as long as period as you can. You know, like I said, I believe one of the reasons there hasn't been the number of hospital admissions that there could have been, I believe a whole lot of people don't want to go to the hospital. Not only because they've been hearing for 6 weeks how the hospitals were going to be overrun or are overrun, but here's the other thing. Once you get admitted, you can't have visitors. So if being close with your family, look, the reason hospice is so popular and has had this movement towards hospice care is because people would rather be at home in their final days, or, you know, whether they are really their final days, you know, and so they'd rather die at home. But to the extent that people would rather have care in their own home rather than some cold hospital with limited access to your own family, I think that's a big contributor. So I think the numbers are not accurate, and they can't be accurate. There's virtually no way to come up with the numbers that would be satisfying to really track the spread, and you know, and that's unfortunate. All right, as I mentioned, I want to talk a little bit about what's happening closer to home here. You know, I live on the Cattaraugus territory of Seneca Nation. I'm not Seneca, so you know that's I gotta say it straight up. But it was really just a matter of time before there was going to be a confirmed case in Seneca territory, and 2 cases, you know, at least 2 cases, one in Allegheny and one here in Cattaraugus, happened within, you know, maybe even within a day of each other, and of course that sent shockwaves. It shouldn't have, because it should have been anticipated. And these are 2 cases that are confirmed by test. Now, there have been people sick for months that haven't been able to get tested. In fact, if you were sick and you lived in Cattaraugus or Allegheny, what you were told was then just go home and self-quarantine for 14 days. And so if you were sick and you didn't get violently sick to where you had to be admitted into a hospital, then you were probably going to cycle through and get through the other side of this thing. And nobody would ever know whether you had it or not. Now, if by the time you develop symptoms, you may have already shared the thing with a bunch of people. So it goes without saying that, because this attempt to flatten the curve was not the kind of isolation and shutdown that really could have stopped the spread, just slow the spread. So eventually, and look, Cattaraugus here, the Cattaraugus territory of Seneca Nation was the last place that Erie County, anyway, had listed without an infection. So it was held off pretty good, I guess, for a while. So now here it is. But the immediate reaction has been against the outside. And look, there appears to have been a confirmed case on the Tonawanda territory as well. The Tonawanda Senecas. Their territory has a confirmed case too, and the same kind of reaction. Oh, well, we need to shut out the outside. There's no way to determine whether somebody got sick because of an outsider coming onto the territory, or because this definition of essential services is such that people are still going to Walmart. I'm still going to Walmart. I don't do it every day, and I do try to be careful. But look, you go to any place. Look, and they've listed. The New York State has liquor stores listed as essential services. And at this point they might be, but so the number of stores and facilities and businesses that have passed the test for essential services is pretty broad. And they haven't had a standard protocol I mean, look, you can go into some grocery stores and the people have a plastic sheet in front of them and they've got masks on, they have gloves. Others have none. Same thing with fast food. I've gone through fast food where some people are wearing gloves and some people aren't. Some people are wearing masks, some people aren't. So the standards are all over the map, which means, of course, that the thing's going to continue to spread. But once a couple of cases were confirmed here on the Seneca Nation, the Seneca Nation took some steps, and the president of Seneca Nation declared a stay-at-home order. Now, there was already a bit of a stay-at-home recommendation, I guess, but now that's been upped to, I mean, this is literally saying all individuals residing on the Seneca Nation territory are ordered to remain in their residences. I'm not just stay at home on your property. They're saying they're ordered to remain in their residences between 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. Now, I don't even know how that's possibly enforced. Honestly, I don't even know if under the Seneca Nation Constitution, if the president has the authority to even order such a thing. But it's been done. It's been done. And I know it's been done for good intentions, but it is somewhat problematic. It says all visitors to the Seneca Nation must leave the territory by 7:30 p.m. Well, but this is being said excluding essential services. So I don't even know what that means. If the stores that operate on the Seneca territory are considered essential services because they sell food or gas, does that mean that customers can't come anymore? I mean, there's a lot that doesn't make sense to me. So again, a knee-jerk reaction, this rather firm and strict order, effective Sunday, April 12th at 8 p.m. All businesses other than those that provide essential services. I thought all the businesses were closed that weren't providing essential services, but they must be closed, and they got to close at 8 p.m. and can't open till 6. I don't know what stores were open that wouldn't fit the definition of an essential service. So, I mean, this is an activity that an order that the president of Seneca Nation has taken, and I'm not trying to criticize, Ricky Armstrong, the president, but this is very reactive to the fact that 2 cases showed up. Now, in Tonawanda, from what I understand out there has been a bit of a movement. And again, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But I got a call from some people that said the men are trying to shut off Tonawanda so nobody can come onto the territory. Well, the difference between Tonawanda and Seneca Nation territory is Tonawanda doesn't have main thoroughfares. I mean, they have one road, Bloomingdale, that goes kind of through, right through to Akron. But it isn't, that would be the only the most main road that would be closed, I guess. But it doesn't have the throughway like Cattaraugus does. It doesn't have Interstate 86 like Allegheny does. It doesn't have routes 5 and 20 like Cattaraugus does, or routes 219 and 17 like Allegheny does. So it's not the same calculation about shutting it off. And I know I know that Ricky Armstrong isn't talking about shutting the thruway down at 8 o'clock. Or assessing people because those exits are either side of the Seneca Nation territory, or the road goes through. So there's stuff that's a little indifferent here. And of course, the other thing that's on the Allegheny territory is that Salamanca is a non-native municipality located on the Seneca Nation territory. Now I understand they've got like a curfew in place as well, but this is kind of awkward. In Tonawanda, it's probably an easier thing to shut the thing down. But again, there are businesses that will be impacted by that. Now, one of the things that happens quite often is there'll be some impetus for some of the general public on native territories to let their anti-business juices flow. And that's what we started seeing here. Among the concerns that went to shutting the NFDA bus coming to the territory was that fact that people were coming on a bus, on using Western New York public transit to come to Cattaraugus to buy goods, to buy cigarettes and such. And would those people be carrying in COVID-19? Well, you also have in both Allegheny and Cattaraugus a fuel war that's been going on where gas is being sold for more than $1 less than off territory prices, down in the 70 something cents range in some stores. And that's obviously going to bring people out. People can only fill their car so many times, but so a certain segment of the population, and the same thing I'm sure happens out in Tonawanda, while these damn businesses are bringing the disease onto our territories. And of course, there's no way of knowing that. There's no way of knowing unless it is a store clerk who hasn't left the territory, who only goes to work, who gets sick. That might be the only way you can make the assumption that a customer brought it in. But if that store clerk is going to shop at Walmart or wherever, then there's no way of knowing whether that store clerk went out and picked up the disease out there and brought it back, or whether a non-native customer brought it to territory. Look, I get the whole idea of trying to limit travel, and I think we as Native people, we have the right to close off our territories if we deem the outside a threat. I just think that there has to be a pretty unanimous, there has to be consent within the territory to do it, I would think. And I'm not trying to pit this just against businesses against residents. No, that's not what I'm suggesting at all. But keep in mind that the businesses do have some people still working. And look, I get it. I know there's a whole lot of Native people who will talk about sovereignty all day long. And when there's a check to be gotten from Donald Trump, they'll sign up for him. So, but I get it. I mean, look, the money's out there. It's available. Why not? Why not go for it, I guess. But, and look, and I'm even hearing, and the NPR station say, look, if you have a choice of staying home and collecting unemployment or going to work and placing yourself at risk, they've never said this before. I've never heard anybody say, stay home and collect unemployment rather than go out and get a job or go to your job. But that's what they're saying now. So it's a completely different mindset. For our native territories, can we all sit back and hope that the federal government's going to send us checks? And if they send us checks, what do we do with them if we can't even shop in our own community because we're taking on an anti-business sentiment here? And look, I know we don't have a whole lot of full service enterprises on our territory. We've got some basic grocery items that are sold at some stores, and I think some of those guys are taking a pretty good hit. So there's a different calculation that's got to be thought of here. And and again, this is tough, folks. There's no easy answers to this thing. As I'm going back and forth with people on Twitter and Facebook and emailing people, I don't have a solution to this thing. And nobody does. I mean, that's why you've got politicians, on either side of the political spectrum and frankly, Native politicians as well. I Jake and I talked about me trying to get somebody from Navajo territory to kind of talk about their circumstance because they're one of the Native territories getting hit the hardest. And some of the initial feedback I got from a few people is most of the leadership in Navajo are such devout Christians. All they're saying is pray. Well, I got to tell you, if the only thing you're going to offer people is to pray, then you shouldn't be in that freaking position. Get the hell out of the office because you don't need a counselor to tell you that. They have priests for that. So I don't know. What I will say is praying isn't the answer. And, and I've said this before, you're not going to vote and you're not going to pray yourself out of trouble. In this situation, we all need to, it's the irony of working together, but working apart. And that's what's really at play here. I think, we have to limit our exposure to people as much as possible. And unfortunately, even doing that, it's probably going to spread. You're probably still going to have the same rate of infection, but you hope that while when people who do have compromised health system, whether it's their respiratory issues or some underlying conditions, you hope that you can easily get them treatment, which is complicated. It's complicated. I mean, look, where we live here in Cattaraugus, the closest hospital we had, which is only about 10 miles down the road, is closed now. It's not even in business. So we've got to travel all the way to Dunkirk or all the way to Buffalo to even get health care. The clinic has not been able to, they still have not been able to administer tests, not the Seneca Nation Health Services. Ricky Armstrong, in a statement last week, suggested that was coming, but we're talking about 2 months into this thing. So apparently it must have been an afterthought for Native people to finally be able to do testing, which is probably what has contributed to some of what the Navajo are facing. Look, I'm not going to say, well, we as Native people, we've lived through this before, because I think that's a callous thing to say, because the reality is many didn't. When I talk about people saying, well, we survived residential schools, no, many didn't. The infections that came, with colonization wiped out 90% of our population. We can't have that. We can't afford that, culturally, our families can't take that kind of loss. So we've got to be careful. Look, this disease doesn't kill everybody, but it does. It has taken lives, and will continue to take lives. The one thing I said on the last show that concerned me was when I heard Trump's doctors, Fauci, and what's the other woman's name? I never remember her name. Birx, right? Of Fauci and Birx suggesting that the estimates of loss of life between 100 and 200,000 was probably too large. That it may only be 60,000. And I'm thinking, that's to lower that estimate before you've been able to test more than 1% of the population is absurd to me. There may be 100,000 people that have died of this disease already, and they just don't know. And frankly, this is where politics comes into the whole thing. Politics and economics come into the whole thing. Trust me, Trump does not want a crashed economy on his watch. He's got it. But as long as he can pitch this idea that it would have been worse if he wasn't such a great leader, and as long as there are gullible idiots out there who are going to believe that stuff, and when the scientists and the doctors and the statisticians are using numbers on a website that cannot possibly reflect reality because they have no way, because they aren't testing dead people, and they've only tested less than 1% of the population. It just makes your mind twirl to think, we're supposed to believe all this stuff. I mean, like I said, there's what's the total? 26,000. Yeah, there's only over 26,000 deaths in the United States right now. That are confirmed by test. And then you hear New York City saying, "Well, we got another 3,700 that are probably that probably should be characterized as death by COVID-19." That's just one city. So when you look across the country, people who have either died of pneumonia or some other organ failure associated with a respiratory illness, we don't know what that number is going to be. And since they're never going to test those folks, if they weren't tested already, then you'll never know. Nobody's ever going to know what the total death count is on this thing. And all those people who, again, were trying to downplay it, saying, oh, they're hyping this thing up. It's not nearly as contagious. It's not nearly as deadly. Look, it doesn't have a 50% death rate, but thus far it's got a 4% one. And frankly, the United States, it's closer to 5%. So that's problematic. Now, that's a death rate based only on the people who have been tested. There's a whole lot of people who, if we're tested, maybe completely symptom free. That would bring that death rate down some. But you know what? Those aren't the people who are being tested. The only people being tested at this point are people so sick they're going to the hospital because they can't breathe. Or in some cases, if you're pregnant and you're starting to have these symptoms, and frankly, that's part of one of the ways it's shown itself here in Cattaraugus. But the numbers are not the end all accurate information. They do not provide the adequate window to view this thing. And it's important that people realize that. We still have to use our own common sense here. And so when you get a governor telling you, oh, it's fine now, you can all go back to work, or a president telling you that, maybe it will be time to go to work. But do know one thing. Even all those people who got tested and tested negative are still susceptible to catching this thing. So this is not over by a long shot. Like I said, flattening the curve means fattening the curve. This thing is going to stretch out for months. There's no evidence that heat is somehow killing it. One of the hot spots, literally one of the hot spots for this disease is New Orleans. Not exactly the coldest place on the planet. Some of the places in Asia and Australia that have been struck by this thing are not have not come out of the winter on this thing. So the numbers you're being fed and on these daily briefings every single day, I'm sorry. I think hospital admissions is a poor measure of whether this thing is subsiding at all. And while I will give Andrew Cuomo credit, he's saying, look, we've reached its apex, but the apex is terrible. When you reach the apex and you hang there for a week or 2 or 3, that means you're at the highest level of infection, the highest level of death, daily deaths, and you're hanging there. Look, it's great to say, okay, our death rate's not increasing. Well, until today. Again, the highest number of deaths in a single day in the United States today, 2,407 people. And those are people, folks. That's not just a stat. So when I hear Donald Trump talking about being gloriously victorious over this disease and winning this thing beautifully, or whatever other superlatives he wants to throw at this thing, it's ridiculous to not understand that people are dying in the United States 2,400 in a single day. So as I watch guys who sit in front of their computers and and are working for the Trump administration saying, "Oh, we're gonna scale that number down, and we're gonna say only 60,000 people are gonna die." Are you going to make the numbers match that? Are your graphs going to indicate reality, or are you going to make the graphs match the number that you want so you can put people back to work? I don't know. This is what we have yet to see, folks. In the meantime, look, stay home and close to your families. And look, I'm not even spending time with my grandkids anymore. This is the sacrifice. And look, in the long term, we've got to think about the most vulnerable people in our families that we want to keep healthy. So stay home and be safe. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. We'll see you in a few days. Yahweh.